Imagine being out fishing for the day, enjoying some fresh air and a little alone time. Imagine thinking you're about to reel in the biggest catch of the day. However, your big catch doesn't turn out to be a squid like you thought, but a human body tied to a steel cross with metal wire and the leftovers of the plastic bag it was once wrapped in. In today's story, we're going back to Australia to discover the story of the Rack Man, an unidentified man whose lifeless body was found in a river tied to a makeshift rack. And even after discovering who he was, what happened to him still remains a mystery. The Hawkesbury is a 75-mile-long river which encircles Sydney and its metropolitan region. It's one of the main coastal fisheries in New South Wales and provides a large part of the commercial fishing in the area. This is what Mark Peterson and his crew were doing aboard the Lady Marion on August 11th, 1994. Using their vast nets, they would fish the numerous squids in the river. That morning, they felt one of the nets was particularly heavy. Thinking they'd made a great catch, they lifted the net. To their surprise, they found what looked like some sort of wreckage. However, as they took a second look, they found it was much more than that. As I pulled it in, I saw there were plastic bags tied to it, and then I saw a bone stick out one of the bags. The body was wrapped in plastic, or had been at some point. Most of the plastic had disintegrated by then, and only a few strands of it were left caught in the 1.82 meter long steel-framed cross. The steel bars composing the cross had been welded together, and the body had been tightly tied to them using wires and ropes around the neck, torso, wrists, and legs. Whether or not the unidentified body had been dead or alive when tied to the cross was hard to say. The body had been underwater for months. Whichever the case, given the way it had been securely tied in, it didn't really matter. There was no way of escaping the wire and the ropes. The body was studied by the Institute of Forensic Medicine in Glebe. Scientists determined it had been submerged for 6 to 12 months, and the cause of death, if not drowning, could have been blunt force trauma to the head. But like we mentioned earlier, given the state of the body, it's hard to pinpoint if the victim was thrown in the river before or after sustaining the injuries to the head. A description of the body was given after studying his bone structure and the remains. It was a Caucasian adult male between 21 and 46 years old, with a height of approximately 1 meter 60 to 1 meter 66. The date of his death, given it was the blunt force trauma to the head that killed him, was thought to be around early 1993, but it was hard to know if he'd been immediately thrown into the river or not. Considering the river's lengths and its currents, it was speculated his death must have happened somewhere within the Sydney metropolitan area. Missing persons cases dated around early 1993 in Sydney were checked out, but with so little to identify the victim with, the investigation was too broad to pinpoint a specific person who matched the unidentified man. His description was too generic, and any additional evidence had been eroded by the water. The police released facial reconstruction portraits, hoping somebody would find a resemblance to a missing loved one, a friend, or a neighbor. But it seemed that nobody knew who this man was. So with nothing else to identify him by, he began to be referred to as Rack Man, the mysterious man who had been tied to a steel frame and underwater for over a year. A reward of $100,000 was offered to anyone who gave information to help solve the case, but nobody came forward. His remains were held at the morgue in the Institute of Forensic Medicine under the name of Unknown Human Remains E48293 for 25 years. A quarter of a century went by before any light was shed on Rackman's case. But in August of 2018, DNA would put a name to Rackman. Like we've seen in many cases on this channel, DNA advances have helped close hundreds of cold cases in the past few years, and its accuracy is only getting better. The New South Wales State Coroner confirmed in August of 2018 that DNA had identified the victim as 36-year-old Max Tanzewski. Max Tanzewski was 36 years old at the time of his disappearance. He was 1 meter 67 centimeters tall, had a heavy build, brown hair and brown eyes. This was the description given by his partner, the last person to see him alive in the house they shared in the west suburb of Newtown. It was January 11th of 1993. Tanzewski had a gambling addiction, something he had admitted himself. Before he disappeared, he had withdrawn $1,800 in cash. He often traveled to the Gold Coast and gambled at casinos, so initially his partner thought he had gone to one of those trips. However, when he didn't return home after a few days, the family reported him missing. When Rackman was discovered, his name came up as one of the possible matches. However, dental records were unclear due to the erosion caused by the water, and without any further remains matching him, Tanzewski's name was discarded as being the victim. And so, over 20 years went by without any new information. It wasn't until 2014 and 2015 when the police began revisiting old cold cases and using modern-day forensics to try and solve them. In 2018, it would finally be confirmed that Rackman was actually Max Tanzewski. Although he was now identified, the cause of his bizarre ending is still unknown. Tanzewski was never related to any gangs, but there is reason to believe he carried some debt from his gambling addiction. If we add that to the blunt force trauma to the head, as well as the way the body was disposed of, investigators believe Tanzewski was murdered in some sort of settling by someone he owed money to. However, the elaborate disposal of the body, the welded steel frame, the tight knots, it all seems a bit too personal. Was Tanzewski in more trouble than his family suspected? And how many people were actually involved in this case? Considering it has been well over 25 years, the chances of solving this case are very slim. However, Australia's Crime Stoppers are still hard at work and urge any relevant information surrounding Max Tanzewski's case to be communicated to them via their website or their phone number. Thank you for watching this video. If you found it interesting, please click the like button and subscribe to the Back of the Archive. I hope to see you in the next story. Goodbye.